Good afternoon, everybody. It is Friday, and Shelby and I are heading up to Troy, Montana this weekend to get some axle work done for me and to hang out with the family. So we're all packed up, ready to go. We're just waiting for Shelby to get home now. So we got the truck loaded up, got the 9-inch and the Dana 44 in there, my knuckles, some parts, and a big old beam for Mr. Great Lake. So we're heading off to Troy. Hi, buddy. Good morning. We made it to Troy last night, and we started working on the axles this morning, and we were getting everything torn apart, and I was like, oh crap, I need to film all this. So I ran and grabbed the camera, but let's see what we got. Got the knuckles, all those pulled out. So I can clean those up and get those painted. And we got our diff here. We're getting all this stuff pulled out. We got everything marked so we know where it goes back in. And we got a box of parts. So we have the Eaton E-locker out and our ring gear. And we're getting prepared to mate those two together. We have our install kit over here for all that, and I'm getting the hole drilled out on the axle housing for our pass-through wire to engage the locker. So we got the carrier pulled out. I got axle tubes cleaned, so we gotta spray out the center chunk now. Got the new carrier and ring gear on there. We're getting all the bolts torqued down. What's the torque spec on these? 55 foot-pounds with a red Loctite. So we got all our bolts torqued down to 55 foot-pounds. We had to use a crow's foot on a torque wrench because the newer JK44s, they have machined grooves so you can get a socket over there. But this being an older Ford high pinion 44, we have to use the smaller hole selection on the locker, which there's no groove for a socket. So when you're running your crow's foot on your torque wrench, you need to be at a 90 degrees, and that will not change your torque spec. So we got them all done to 55. We torqued them the same way you would a wheel. We just started on one side with the other in a star pattern and marked them as we went. So they're all done. So we got the inner axle seals pressed in, and we threw some wheel bearing grease inside the groove of them just to hold that spring on, which creates your seal. So when you're throwing your axle shafts in, that spring, you can see it right there on the top, that silver, that spring should not pop off now, so you shouldn't have any leaking inner axle seals. Go ahead and get the pinion set up. We have to get all the bearings pressed on. So we'll see when that's done. So we're pressing the pinion bearing on right now. There it is. So we took some gear oil and we lubed up that bearing to make that press fit process a little easier. And when you're doing this, you want to check your tolerances on the inside of your bearing and then your shaft. Yukon tends to put a thick coat of this black oxide coating on. So if you are too far out in your tolerances, it's going to be pretty hard to get that bearing on even with a press. So you can just take some 3M, some Scotch-Brite, and rub down your surface a little bit to help you with the install. So we're getting the pinion set up. We checked the specs for it, and for a Dana 44 from the factory, you're at 042. We ended up being at 047, which means our housing is probably milled a little bit deep, so you got to add some extra shims in there to bring it back out. But we're going to go ahead and get this one set up how the factory one was, and then count shims on our carrier to get our new carrier set up the same, so our pinion will be, or our gear mesh will be pretty close to perfect based on how it was when we pulled it apart. So we have our clamshell puller on there. Basically what this is you have two halves, so you can encompass the entire bearing in it. And then you're going to push this rod down, which is going to pull the whole assembly up and pull that bearing off. There it is. So when you do this, you want to make sure you get all your shims off of the backside of the bearing so you can measure how thick they are and get your left to right measurement right for where your carrier sits in the housing. So the way this clamshell press sets up is you put your center punch in there, slip this over the top.
Oh, you've got your race.
Oh, I need the race on there, huh?
Yeah. Otherwise it'll pull the bearing apart.
Oh. Throw your race over it. And then you want to throw your center punch in there. Throw the big puller over the top. And then you have your clamshell here, which is going to mate like that. So you have your two pieces coming on there.
You don't want a lot of up and down slop. You want that tight.
Yeah, so no play in it.
This adjusts up and down.
Oh, okay.
So you need to have that tight when this goes on.
There's no play in it.
Right.
And then you slip your collar over the top. Tighten your collar down. And that holds everything together. And then you hit it with your impact. So now we got both sides bearings off. We are gonna measure our shims and figure out how far each direction the carrier needs to go. So this side on the bottom, the way the gear faces is your gear side, and then this is your away from gear side. So we measured everything, and our gear side is at 0.032, and then our opposite gear side is at 0.057, and then there's our pinion shim. So we have those measurements so we can set up the new carrier with the same shim pattern. So everything you need for your install is going to come in your install kit from Yukon Gears. So our inner axle seals were in here, and then we have all of our shims and everything in there. And then this is what, gear mesh paint and everything? And Loctite
and gear paint.
Yeah, so you have your Loctite and gear paint in there for when you're setting your gear mesh. And then you get your new pinion nut and seals and everything. Makes it easy to install. So we have all of our shims out here. If we look, we are at 47 thousandths. This one was at 20, so we need to come up with 27 thousandths
so we need
on our shim thickness.
That's 15.
So we got 15 here.
Yeah, you got 20 there, so there's 35. And we need to go to 47. So
another 12.
Yep. So we're hoping we have a 12 in here.
That'd be pretty nice. So we went ahead and threw our shims in there. Did we get to the right measurement, or where are we at?
Yeah.
So yeah, we are at 47 thousandths overall. And then this one, when you drop it in, you want to make sure that your indent is facing down. So we'll go ahead and drop that in. And then we can take our pinion and drop all that in with the race and everything.
Pound this in first.
Pound the race in, because that is a press fit piece. So we got our race set in there, and now we're gonna pound it in. Is this a specialty tool?
Yes.
And you can buy a full kit on them, or individual
Yukon
pieces?
It's a full kit from Yukon.
So Yukon sells these for pounding in your races.
Race driver.
It's a race driver, and they sell a kit on them. So you just gotta make sure you're at the right sized one, so you're not pounding in the wrong spot. But you just lay that in there, and then you hit it with a BFH. You can hear that difference in sound, which means it's all the way in there, because then you're going to start hitting the case. So we're good there. So we got that race pounded in, and this is where things get a little sketchy, because we have that shimmed out to hopefully the right depth. We have it all. Everything we're doing is based off of how it came from the manufacturer. If for some reason we have to shim it out more, we can pull this bearing off and shim it to fudge it a little bit. But if we're way off and we need to pull shims out, then we got to get another one of these slingers. This is the one that I pulled out of there when we hammered everything out originally. The problem is the install kit only comes with one slinger. You need these for the high pinion axles because it keeps oil back there and it keeps your pinion bearing oiled. If you don't have it, all your oil is going to drain back into the bottom of your housing. Your bearing is going to run dry and you're going to spin a race. So that is not a good day. So if we are not at the right depth and we need to take shims out, then we need to find another one of these slingers because you destroy it when you pull that race out. So fingers crossed we are at the right depth there. And then you take your major adjustments by adjusting your pinion in and out. And then your micro adjustments are with your carrier left to right. So that's our exterior pinion bearing race. There are no shims behind that or anything. So I messed up on disassembly and I didn't keep track of everything. So here are the shims that are going on the back side of your pinion, and that'll shim it out.
It's preload for that's your pinion preload.
That's your pinion preload there. I didn't pay attention when I was taking everything apart and I just threw everything in the garbage bin. So my bad. We're digging through. So if we don't set it up right, it's my fault. So our pinion preload was at 54
shim stack
for our shim stack, and we found what, 58?
That's 55.
55. We're at 55 now, so that's close enough. We're gonna throw that in, see how it goes, and if we're right there, otherwise we can adjust it accordingly.
Brands.
So we went out and got a Speedy Sleeve Seal Saver, bunch of different brands for these. Here's the part number for the high pinion 44. This is what they just had at the local auto shop store today. So this goes on your yoke. My yoke has some pitting on there. So all you're gonna do is put it over the top. It comes with the install tool, which goes over that. You're gonna pound it on. That gives you a new sealing surface to prevent you from having a leaky pinion seal. And you're going to use green sleeve retainer. This is from Loctite. I'm sure there's other brands, but we're using the Loctite stuff. So we're going to go ahead and pound that on, and we'll be good to go. So we just threw a bunch of that seal saver on there. You can't have too much, and then you're going to wipe the excess off. When you're pounding this on, you're going to use a rubber mallet so you don't dent and break stuff.
You can actually break the lip off at the bottom. I've done it before, and you can actually see that there's a scored line from the manufacturing process. So if you hit it too hard, you can break that off, so you need to tap it on.
The more you know. So we went ahead and cleaned our threads out, took a little file, got as much gunk out of those splines as possible, sprayed it down with some brake cleaner, and wiped it down with a rag, just so you have a smooth connection there, so you don't have anything holding you up when you're tightening down your preload, because we need to be between 14 and 19 inch-pounds on that nut. We're going to use the old nut because these nuts are locking nuts. So we're going to use the old one just to get everything set up, and then once we're good and we know where we're at, we're going to throw the new one on to lock it down. So we're putting it up through the back side. There's those preload shims. Bearing. Is that So when you're doing this initial set, you're not going to have your seal in there. So what is that doing?
Well, that's too tight. I can tell you that. But we're going to measure it just to see how too tight is.
Okay. So this is where we need to be at the 14 and 19 inch-pounds, right?
Yeah.
So that's our preload. So that basically is going to be how tight that back bearing is. So this is the moment of truth where we find out where we're at.
You're somewhere around 30.
So that's way too high.
35. Right there is about where it was. That's at 35.
So again, we need to be between 14 and 19. So we got to pull this off and then add shims in there to spread it out a little more. Because right now what we're doing is measuring the preload between the two conical bearings that are facing each other. So we add spacers, or we add more shims in there, it'll space it out a little bit, which will decrease our tension. So we were at 55 on there.
I think we want to try to take it like to, you know, it was 35. A couple thousandths is going to move you more than you think, by my experience. So I would probably try to go in at 58, maybe 59, and that may be too much. So we'll see.
The problem running into is they want it pretty tight for the Dana 44s, but you have a small range there. So we need to be between 14 and 19 inch-pounds.
So there's 3.
Which is pretty tight. And the shims we have in the kit, they're pretty thick.
There's 5. Let's do this. Let's replace this 5 with a 7. You said we had a 7, right?
Those should be 8s.
These are 8s. This is 7.
And 110 is in there. I think that was the 7.
This is a 7.
So we took 2 of the 3s out there, so we took 6 thousandths out, and we're putting an 8 in, so we're adding 2 thousandths, which is getting us about 60 something, 62 thousandths around there, which we were at what, 58, 59 before.
We were 50, supposedly 55, but that fluctuates a little bit because these are stacked shims. Once you really compress them, you know, so it's a little bit of Kentucky windage.
So we're gonna get all that thrown back in and see where we're at. All right, here we are.
So now we're at 25. So 2 thousandths roughly moved us roughly 10.
Yeah.
But we're still too
high.
Yeah.
So we need to go almost another 10 down. It's 14 to 19.
So we need
another 2 thousandths in there.
Another 2 thousandths in there should get us pretty darn close.
Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and pull it out again and add another 2 thousandths. All right, so we pulled the 8 out and we put a 10 in. That's gonna give us, should be 2 thousandths. It should get us to the right spot.
It's not.
Where are we at?
Yeah, about where we were before. So that is your Dana 44 pain in the rear.
I was hoping 3rd time's a charm, but looks like we're gonna have to do it a 4th time.
Or 5th.
Or 5th. 6th, or 7th. So we pulled those shims out another, what, 6 times or so, trying to get everything right.
At least 3.
We're finally within that 14 to 19 inch-pounds range. So what are we gonna do now? Install the seals and get that all buttoned up and torqued down?
We're gonna set up the carrier with the shims. Then we're gonna drop the carrier in. We're gonna pull a pattern.
Sounds good to me. So again, we put gear oil on the conical bearing to help with sliding it onto the shaft. We're gonna go ahead and press that one on, press the back side on, and then we can fit the carrier in the housing. There it is. So are there any shims between the bearings?
There's shims underneath.
There are shims underneath.
Yeah, I already measured them out and put them under there.
And that was to what we had earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those shims do go between the bearing and the carrier.
Yep.
So don't forget to put those in there. Or have a bad day having to pull that out. Do it again. So like I was saying, we have all those shims in there. These ones are measured out to be 057, which is what we had before on the old carrier on the back side, so opposite gear side. Now we're just gonna press that bearing on once it's all greased up and ready to go. We got our cables right out that hole, and we're just pounding that in. You want to go back and forth so you don't go in cockeyed and get it all bound up. And then these are just going to rest on the sides of the housing, it looks like, and that'll prevent it from rotating so your wire doesn't get bound up and torn out. So we're in there pretty much all the way, and you can see these anti-rotation bars, how they just hit the sides, and that prevents your wiring from getting torn out. So now we're going to throw the caps in there, and it's going to pull us the rest of the way in. We can check our gear mesh, and if we're good to go, then we can finish this up. Alright, so now we're going to check our setup specifications. Our backlash, you can't really see it, our backlash is supposed to be at 6 to 10, and our torque spec for the cap is 60 foot-pounds. So we're here getting them torqued down to 60, and then we'll check our backlash on there. So we got everything torqued down, and we do not have any backlash in there. It's tight. So we have to pull it out, and we're going to shim it over to our left. So probably what, just take out from this side, or from this side, because we're pretty tight in there, huh?
It had backlash before we torqued it, but
yeah,
it doesn't anymore. So
that means we gotta take out from this side and add to this side.
Yep.
So you pulled the carrier back out, and now we're gonna pull these bearings off and keep shimming it left and right to get our backlash set. So we'll see it when we get that done.
See, that's the problem. When I had it positioned, I had to move it this way a little bit because it was touching back in here.
Okay.
And then that throws your backlash reading off.
Okay.
So you want to see.
So we're at 11.
Yeah, it looks like 12.
11 or 12, and we need to be at 6 to 10.
Yeah. But
so we need to shim it.
we're just outside the high range.
Yeah.
So we're going to run a pattern.
Okay.
While we got it in there, and then that'll tell us more.
Okay.
Because we may have to adjust the pinion, but you don't know until you run the pattern.
Okay. So we're going to be painting the gears now, and then you turn it over one cycle.
Yeah, we're going to
see where they land.
We're going to run it through one way, and then we're going to back it right through so you get a coast and a drive side reading. And you want to put some pressure on the ring gear when you're running it through, so we're going to get it close down in there. Hold the housing so it doesn't spin. Okay. So that's your drive side.
Okay.
And unfortunately, let's look at the coast side.
Are we too deep?
Well, the coast side looks really good.
Okay. So that's, you can see where the pinion gear was touching because there's no paint.
Right.
So that shows you where your gears are landing and where your mesh is at. So this is our drive side, which looks good.
Coast side.
Coast side. And then our drive side back here, which is a little deep, would you say?
Well, it doesn't look horrible, but you tend to want that to be not as far out on the tooth.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it could be worse. It's not the greatest pattern. Granted, our backlash is out, so we're on the high side of the backlash. So in theory, if we pull this out and we move the backlash, we tighten up our backlash, it's going to move the ring gear closer to the pinion, so that may
change. It will change.
Well, it's going to change, and it may change. It's going to make it look lower. It may tighten that pattern up.
Okay.
And may be acceptable once we get the backlash where it's supposed to be.
Okay.
It doesn't look horrible. Coast side looks really good, so that's why I'm thinking tighten up the backlash, get it in spec, and then That'll look good.
Sounds good. So we're going to pull that carrier out again and throw another shim in there on the right side this time to push it back over towards the pinion gear. So we pulled the carrier out, we shimmed it back over a little bit, and our backlash is within spec. I think we're right at the high end of 10. And our mesh looks good. So we went ahead and put the wires through. We're going to tape those off because I have to bring these back to Helena still. But our diff is done now. So we can go ahead and silicone the diff cover on, or I think we have gaskets for it, right? We do have new gaskets for those. So we're good here. So we're going to throw that on and then get the knuckles cleaned up so we can get those painted, and then we can do ball joints and all that stuff. But we'll probably go ahead and do the 9-inch while the paint's drying on those knuckles. So we're using a lube locker front gasket on this. These are directional and they are reusable, so you don't have to deal with any silicone and scraping and cleaning. You just throw it on there, and every time you pull the housing off, you can reuse the same gasket. So you can get these from anyone that sells gear and axle part, or Great Lake Offroad, which is where we're getting all of our parts from today. And he's providing all the install. So this is packing that seal with grease. Is this for the same reason, for retaining that spring?
Yeah, so when you're pounding this in, that spring just doesn't pop off when you're pounding this in, which I've had happen numerous times. Some seals are better than others.
And that spring is the main reason that
keeps
seals
tension.
will leak.
Yeah, it keeps tension on that rubber around in here.
And if that spring goes bad, or if it comes off, then you're gonna have a pinion leak or axle seal leak, depending on which seal it is. So,
or wheel bearing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and get all that thrown in there, and then we can get the new locking nut put on, everything torqued down to the right spec, and the front axle will be good to go. It's looking pretty good. I gotta redo all my paint on this anyway. Should have probably left it on primer because that primer's holding up good, but it's all just spray paint, so it touches up easy. So when you put this seal in, you want to make sure you have that washer back there, the thrust washer, and then you can go ahead and pound your seal in. So when you're getting this seal on there, it's the same as any other bearings or seals being pressed on. You want to go as straight on as possible so you don't get any binding side to side.
I think it's bottomed out.
And then you want to go until you're bottomed out. So you'll see there shouldn't be a gap here, and if there's a gap, it should be very small. All right, there we are. We threw some red Loctite on that pinion nut. We torqued it down. It says about 160 to 200 foot-pounds for that. So we got down to there, and we're good to go. This axle is complete for now. Time to move on to that 9-inch. Alright, so I got the 9-inch all disassembled, and all the parts are cleaned off and sitting here drying. Here's our cute little grizzly locker we're putting in. All of our bolts and our ring gears right here. We're gonna go ahead and heat the ring gear up to help ease it onto that carrier. That's all it takes. Just use the rosebud tip for that.
Start putting some bolts in that.
Heat it up, and now we're gonna bolt it down. So you're gonna want to apply red Loctite to all your ring gear bolts. And then for the Ford 9-inch with OEM gears, you're going to run it at 60 foot-pounds. So we're going to torque all that down. And again, that is a star pattern. Yeah, we're seated. So we got all of our carrier bearings pressed on. And we just got our race in for, what was this piece again?
That's the pinion support.
For the pinion support.
That's a Daytona.
A Daytona pinion support, which is an upgraded pinion support for the Ford 9-inch. Pretty rad. This is all billet aluminum. So now we're just going to continue getting everything assembled. All right, so we are getting our pinion preload set. So we have everything assembled. We are running a crush sleeve eliminator kit, which you see right here. And there's all of our shims down there. So that basically will allow us to set our preload up the same as that Dana 44 we just did. So we don't have really anything to run by based on for that shim spacing, so we kind of made a guess based on other axles. And what did we do for shim spacing to start?
Starting at 75.
We're starting at 75 thousandths for a shim spacing. And then here's our new yoke. The axle I bought didn't come with a yoke, so we're going to throw that on and start sucking it down with the old pinion nut so we don't have to use the new one, so we can save that for the final assembly. So we got the pinion all put together and our preload was not high enough, so we tore it apart and now we're measuring our overall distance.
507.
507.
507 thousandths.
So we're at 507 thousandths, so we got to add more preload, so we're gonna go wider.
We got to take away.
I thought we were too light.
We were. That means there's not enough there's too much separation between the two bearings, conical bearings.
Okay.
So we got to take less out, and then that'll let the conical bearings seat into the races, which creates more resistance.
Gotcha. So we need to take away. So we're gonna go ahead and take it away, and we'll see when we're putting it back together. So we pulled this apart probably 10 times, and we finally got it figured out. I don't remember what number we landed on for shim thickness, but we're right there at 15, which is perfect. It calls for between 14 and 16 inch pounds, so 15 is perfect. So our brand new yoke, our Daytona bearing retainer, we're all good on that. Everything's perfect. Now we can go ahead and put this in the 9-inch third member, and all we need to do then is take our shims to get our pinion depth right, so we don't have to worry about our preload every time, which is super nice. So go ahead and get this installed now, and then we can do our ring and pinion.
We drop the carrier in.
Right, yeah, cool. All right, so I just got the front side bearing pounded in, and then there's this little retaining clip that gets pounded in on top of it. So you can see that there. So when you put your whole pinion setup in there, it'll sit down into that, and then the end of your pinion will sit in that bearing. So you shim it. This is your pinion height. Throw the shim on there, then we're gonna throw this in, and once we get our pinion height and everything set up, then we're gonna throw the O-ring on it and tighten it down for good. All right, so we have this on loosely. Your bolt pattern is not the same all the way around, so it does go on one way, and when you're looking at it, you have an oil catch right there, and that should be facing opening. So that's just a good point of reference, but she's looking good. Look, all that bling on there. So we ran into some clearancing issues, so we just had to knock this little ridge down with the die grinder on this side, just because our ring gear was hitting that at the proper backlash. So I got that knocked down. Now we're going to reinstall everything. So we got the carrier back in there, and what we're doing is we're putting the caps on. We're not going full tight on these. We're getting them down there, and then we're putting our adjuster sleeves in on the sides. And then we're gonna get our backlash adjusted, and then we're gonna tighten everything down to lock into place. And then the 9 inches have these little tabs which prevent those from backing out. So this is that clearancing issue. It's kind of hard to see, but right there our ring gear was running in, so you can see how tight that clearance is. So we just had to shave that lip off, and now we're good. So we adjusted it down to 0 backlash, and then we loosened up this side and started tightening this side to push it over to create backlash. So now we're gonna do that until we're within spec, which, what's our backlash spec for the
6 to
9 inch?
10.
6 to 10. So once we're in that 6 to 10 range, we'll be good to go. So we just got our first pattern back, and this is what we're looking like. We're obviously too deep with our pinion, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull the pinion off. We're gonna throw another shim in to pull it out by 5/1000ths, and then I'll go ahead and clean the paint off the gears, and we'll do it again, see what we get. So we got our pattern good and dandy. We're happy with it. So we threw our retainers on, we torqued everything, threw the O-ring on this end cap. So the third member is all buttoned up, ready to go. I'm gonna now go ahead and clean these knuckles, get these all painted and drying, and then tomorrow morning we'll do ball joints on those to get this axle assembled out to the knuckles. And then we have a bung that we're gonna weld into that the 9 inch, so I can drain without pulling the third member out. Just make the fluid changes easier, and then I can use a gasket that's non-replaceable. So that'll be good. Gotta get that drilled and welded, and then we can get the 9 inch assembled. We still have the axle shafts over here. We gotta cut these bearings off. We're using these plates, so we gotta clean these up and press new bearings on and everything. So that'll all be tomorrow. So I'll show you the knuckles once I get those all cleaned up and painted, and we'll see you then. So I got everything pulled off the axle shafts. It was pretty easy. They're over here. I just hit everything with a grinder, basically just cut it up. There was so much tension on everything that you got halfway through and they just kind of blew up. So it worked out pretty good. But everything primed down here. Those are the knuckles for the 44, and then these are the bearing retainers for the 9 inch. So I'm just gonna wait for these to dry, and then I'm gonna hit them with black, and then we'll be good to go in the morning. It's turning out pretty good. Good morning. We were working on the 9 inch housing this morning. So for starters, I got a hole drilled out. It's a 3/4 inch hole. We're gonna go ahead and weld in this drain plug so I can drain the axle without having to pull that third member off. So let's go ahead and get it welded in. Alright, so I got that bung welded in. We didn't want to put it on the middle because if we're hitting any rocks or anything, it's going to directly impact that. So a little safety measure we put off to the side. That is going to cause an issue when we are draining fluid since it's not directly on the bottom. But you already have a lip here, so you can't get all the fluid out when you pull the third member. And also I can just jack up one side of the axle because you got to push fluid out of the axle tubes anyhow, because they have the bearings out here that need to be lubricated by the gear fluid or gear oil. So that should not be a big deal for us. So we're getting the races pulled out of the end of the axle tubes, and all we did is clamped 2 plates here as spacers, and then we used a puller with a crossbar to grab the outside of the crown race and push against the crossbar to pull that out. So now we can clean that up and tap in our new crown or our new bearing races. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put the third member in. We're not gonna throw the axle shafts in today just because I still need to get a disc brake kit. So the most we can do on the axle housing now is throw that third member in, and then we can get everything pressed onto the axle shafts for when I do get that disc brake kit. So I'm gonna go ahead and use some black silicone on there. So we got the third member bolted in. All we had bolts laying around for was 5 of these studs. This is cast though, so it should be fine. Should be pretty flat. So we got the bottom 3 on, and then 2 outers. A lot of silicone around the edges, and then once that dries, I'll just cut it off and clean it up. So that's all for this 9 inch. Now we're gonna get started on the axle shafts. So here's the order of operations for this. You have your end plate, which bolts to the axle. You have your seal, your bearing, and then your collar. So you gotta make sure you get it in the right order. Seal. Give your seal there. And your bearing is directional, so it fits in with that groove like that. and then you have your collar on top. So don't get that wrong or it's a bad day. So we got it in the press now. We just did a through plate. The axle shaft is hanging down the bottom. We have everything there with a cone pressed against that retainer. And we're just gonna press right down there. We'll be good to go. There it is. It's all pressed on, ready to go into the axle. All right, so our knuckles are dry now. So we're gonna go ahead and throw all the ball joints in and get them adjusted because they have this adjustment sleeve. Is that for tension, or what does the adjustment sleeve do on these?
No, it just takes up the slack.
Just take up the slack. Okay. So we're gonna get all this stuff pressed in and we'll get it assembled. So we got the ball joints pressed in on this knuckle, and we were able to get C-clips on both ball joints. Take note that on the GM, Dodge, and Jeep knuckles, they have a thicker casting on the upper ball joint, so you won't be able to get the C-clip on those. But for our high pinion 44, we're able to get it on, and you can see there's room there as well. So we're good to go and install these. So we have both knuckles put in. We have the adjusters just lightly started in there, and then the bottom ball joint nuts on it. So we have our torque specs written down over here. So our lower is 70/90, our adjuster is 40, and our upper is 100. So that's the order of operations, right?
Yep.
So,
and then it shouldn't exceed 26 foot-pounds to turn the knuckles.
Right.
When done.
So we're gonna go ahead and get started torquing all this stuff down. All right, the knuckles are on. Everything is torqued down. We got our cotter pins in. Take note when you're doing your upper ball joints and the cotter pins, you don't want to over torque them. So when you're getting close to reaching your 100 foot-pound goal, check where your hole is, and it'd be better to be a little bit under that 100-pound goal than to go over it, because then if you go over, it's gonna be too tight and you're gonna have issues with steering, and you're gonna have memory steer on that. So don't want to do that. So here we are done. Everything's ready to get packed up and go back to Helena. I just want to take a minute and just give a huge shout out to Great Lake Offroad in Troy, Montana. This project would not have been possible without them. They got all of our parts ordered in. They were all the right parts. They got everything installed for us. Everything is perfect on those axles. So that couldn't have been done without them. I don't think I thanked them enough in the video. So just a huge shout out. If you ever need any gear axle parts or installs, full custom builds, they do retubing, everything for axles, go to Great Lake Offroad. They'll get you hooked up. So thanks again for watching. Make sure you order some stuff from Great Lake Offroad, and we'll see you in the next one.